Hello and welcome back to my channel. I know last week I said I was going to talk about my favorite books of the year today, of 2023, but as I was going through the books I read in 2023 and picking my top reads, I felt like I had a pretty clear top 10, but then I also had a stack of books that weren't my absolute favorites, but I still wanted to talk about them. I know Kim of Middle of the Book March always does her favorite 4-star reads, and a lot of people will do honorable mentions. So I wanted to do something similar because these are all books I really enjoyed. They might not have as much staying power as my favorite books or have made a profound impact on me like my best books of 2023, but they are all still really good reads, which I can all highly recommend, and I feel like they deserve their own video. So without further ado, let's get into the books, shall we? I have put these in the order that I read them. First up is The Street by Petry. This is a modern classic, first published I think in 1946, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, 1946. It's about a woman named Ludi Johnson. She is a poor black single mother, and her 8-year-old son have just moved into a cheap apartment in Harlem, and actually the street where they live in is almost like a character on its own, hence the title. And Ludi is really struggling to carve out a life for herself. Poverty, racism, sexism are things that are constantly grinding her down, and this book illustrates really well how that interlinks, how hard it is to break away no matter how hard you try, just the relentlessness of it. The way Petry has captured the disgusting, seedy, slimy way in which all the men in Ludi Johnson's life, apart from her son, have tried to take advantage of her in so many different ways. It's really well done. It's just really icky. I think in some ways we have come a long way in society since the 1940s, but also so much of this is still relevant. It's a very timeless book. I think it's one of those books in the black literature canon that is just a must read. Honestly, the more I think about this book, the more I think maybe I should have put this in my favorites, but there we go. That's why I'm doing this video anyway, to give these books their due. So that was The Street by Petry. Someone is doing some DIY in the building, by the way, so I'm sorry if you hear any kind of construction noises. The next book is Disoriental by Negar Djavadi. This is translated from the French by Tina Cover, and this book starts in the waiting room of a fertility clinic in Paris, where this woman, Kimya, is waiting for an appointment. And as she sits there, she is using this time to tell us about, or reminisce about her family's history. She is an Iranian woman who fled from Iran to France when she was 8 years old, and she goes through her family's history, from her great-grandfather, who was this really formidable figure with a harem of 50 wives. Her parents, who were intellectuals who played a part in the Iranian Revolution. It's about Kimya's own role within the family, and I really loved how we got to know this family, and how the dynamics within this family and all the history of the family has made Kimya the woman who she is now. Obviously it taught me a lot on Iranian history, there is an element of queerness in this book and how that is seen within the Iranian culture. So that was very interesting. This is not a story that is presented in a linear way. You have to fit it all together yourself. But I feel like it pays off in the end, because you end up with this beautiful tapestry almost, where you are given all these parts, all these detailed parts, and you have to take a step back to see all the parts coming together as a story. So it's one of those books that maybe takes a little bit more effort to read and enjoy, but it's a really rewarding book. And I think it's a book that lends itself very well to reread. You'll probably get something out of it, something different out of it every time you read it. The Adventures of Zijian by Gabriela, Cabezon, Camara. This is translated from the Spanish by Fiona McIntosh and Iona McIntyre. This is a book about a young woman called Zijian. We meet her in the year 1872, when she has just run away from an abusive marriage, and she is moving through the Argentinian landscape with her new friend Liz, who's a settler from Scotland, and they are trying to find Liz's husband. It's one of those books that is quite short. It's under 200 pages, but there is so much happening in this. It has a Western vibe to it, with them traveling through this uncharted territory. There's a 19th century naturalist element. They discover new plants and fungi and things like that. Just the book as a whole has a lot of nature writing in it, and the landscape around them plays a big role. They meet the indigenous people of Argentina, so that's part of the story too. And there's also the epic poem that this book is based on. It's a lot. I don't know how she all packed it in, but she did, and it works. I think maybe because at the heart of this story is about the relationship between Gina and Liz. It's about Gina coming into her own and having a kind of reawakening, finding a new family and just carving out a new life for herself. I felt like, despite the difficult topics it tackles, it's a really hopeful story. It's really one of those books that is kind of hard to capture in a few sentences. You just have to experience it for yourself. I was very impressed with it. Charcoal Press, they are really good at finding those great South American stories. The next book is a book I read for the BookTube Prize semi-final. I ended up putting this on my number 2 spot, and that is Foster by Claire Keegan. She is definitely having a moment right now, and rightly so. What an incredibly talented writer she is. This is a very slim little book. Not much happens. It's about a young Irish girl. Her parents are struggling to make ends meet. There's another baby on the way, and basically there's just too many mouths to feed. So our protagonist gets sent to her aunt and uncle to live in the countryside, and there she finds out what it's like to live in a house with people who care for her and love her, and where she feels wanted, and how Claire Keegan manages to put so much warmth, so much heart in this tiny little book, so much in the white space in between the lines. I don't know, but it is masterfully done. For me, this is a book that is definitely worth the hype. Then we have another translated book. In fact, the next 4 are all translated books I read in August for Women in Translation Month. This is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. This is a Belgian author, and this is translated from the French by Ros Swatch. So this book starts with a 14-year-old girl. She is being held captured in an underground bunker with 39 other women. She has been there for most of her life, and she doesn't remember any other life than that life she's living in that bunker. She is, however, the youngest of the group, and most of the other women she's with do remember before time. And I don't really want to say more than that, not necessarily because of spoilers, but I do feel like it's best going into this book knowing as little as possible and just discover it on the way. For me, throughout the book, it became less and less about finding out what is going on, figuring out why these women are held captured, and more about learning about these women's characters, how they relate to each other, and thinking about things like, what if society, as you have always known it, doesn't exist anymore? What are the things you would do different? And what are the things that you would cling on to? What is it that makes us human? What makes life beautiful, and what makes life worth living? It's a book that will absolutely linger in your mind. And the next book is in a very similar vein, but still very distinct as well, and that is The Blue Book of Nebo by Manon Steffan Ros. She wrote this book in Welsh and then adapted it to English herself. So this book centers a mother and a son, who I think is about 14 years old at the beginning of the book. And they, together with her little daughter, are living in a very small town in Wales in this post-apocalyptic world. There has been some kind of nuclear disaster, and most of the people have either fled or they have died of illness from radiation. But yeah, this mother and son duo are still there, and they are trying to survive. Most of their days consist of growing and hunting for food, just taking care of their basic needs. And then one day the boy Dylan finds an empty notebook, and he and his mum decide to use it as a kind of diary, but also with the idea of like recording what is happening to them for people in the future to read and learn about them. It was similar to I Who Have Never Known Men, because in here you have a boy who also doesn't have any memory from a life before the end, as they refer to it in this book, and because he can look at it from a different perspective. He often points out things to his mum that are very strange to him, but normal to us as a reader, and it makes the mum and us realize that we take a lot of things for granted, and maybe as society we act a bit weird sometimes. So the book constantly points out these little things that we won't think twice of, and make us think like, is this the right way to do things? And this is something the mum is very conscious of. She doesn't think this way of living is entirely bad. She is definitely enjoying a life that is more simple and stripped down to what is really important to her, and a life, and she's living a life that is a lot more meaningful to her. Before she was a lot more anxious, but now she has a clear purpose, and just life in general is not so noisy, both in a literal and figurative way. So I think both this and I Who Have Never Known Men are post-apocalyptic books that take a very reflective approach and hold up a mirror to society, saying, are we really on the right track with the way things are going? And do we really need an apocalypse to change that, or can we already start making these changes now? Next is The Last Quarter of the Moon by Zijian. This is translated from the Chinese by Bruce Humes. And the book starts with an elderly woman who is sitting amongst the trees, and she's just thinking back on her life. So she goes back all the way to her childhood and tells about her life up to the present. She is a member of the Evenki tribe. They live in the northeastern part of China, close to the Russian border. They are reindeer herders, so they live a very nomadic lifestyle. And in the beginning of the book, she describes quite an idyllic childhood, where she is like living at one with nature. But of course, as she gets older, she realizes maybe life isn't as idyllic as she believed it was as a young girl. They will have to get through things like severe weather or illnesses that come to their reindeer herd. Also things that are going on in the bigger world. At some point, a lot of men in the tribe will have to go away to serve in the Japanese army. But also things going on within the tribe, like, members of the tribe dying. Some women are struggling with infertility. I love the nature writing and indigenous aspect of it. It's about this tribe's close connection to nature and how they let nature guide them and teach them and provide for them without mistreating it. And I loved reading about the different rituals they had surrounding big life events. I think it's quite a slow book. Obviously, this book is about a group of people and about everything that happens to them over a span of decades. But it's not a plot-driven book. It just kind of ripples on. I just really like being in this environment, in this climate with these people. So even if there wasn't much happening, it was just nice being in this book. Then we have Forbidden Notebook by Alba de Cespedes. This is translated from the Italian. This is the Dutch translation by Manon Steffan Ros. So this is a book about a woman named Valeria. She is in her 40s. She's living in Rome with her husband and 2 adult children. She works in an office and she has this very modest, uneventful life. Typical of what a life would be for a lot of women in Italy at that time. And the book starts when one day she is at a shop and she sees these black empty notebooks, and she decides on a whim to buy one for herself and use it as a sort of diary. And then there's almost this immediate sense of secrecy around this notebook. She doesn't want anyone to read it. She doesn't even want anyone to know that she has it. And every time she writes in the notebook, she feels bad, like she is doing something that is forbidden, because her life has been in the service of someone else for so long. Her husband, her children. She has kind of forgotten what it's like to be her own person with her own thoughts and desires. And through the act of writing in this notebook, she kind of discovers a sense of self again, which on the one hand she finds kind of exciting, but also on the other hand a bit scary. Finding out for her that she can do something that is just for her is overwhelming, and she's afraid to actually do it. So it's very much a character-driven book, and I think especially Valeria is portrayed in such a rich and complex way. She's a likable character, but she's not easy to love. She definitely makes some frustrating choices, and I think that is what makes this book so interesting. This is one of those rediscovered books. I think it was first published in 1952 and only translated to English and other languages a few years ago, and I feel like it's a really beautiful time capsule of a book. Next we have Devotion by Hannah Kent. This book kind of flew under the radar, and I don't really know why. It is set in Germany in the first half of the 19th century, at a time where people of the old Lutheran faith were being persecuted, and they had to practice their faith in secret. And one of these people is Hanne. She is a teenage girl. She feels very different from her peers, especially girls her age. They are all concerned with marriage, starting families and all that, and she just feels very out of step with her peers. She tries to fit in as well, but she just never seems to get it quite right, or say the right thing. She's a very dreamy, wild sort of girl. She loves being outside, being in nature. And she just doesn't really fit very well with this very traditional religious community she's a part of. And then one day she meets Thea, and in her she finds a kindred spirit, a soulmate, and they develop a very loving relationship. At some point in the story, the community has an opportunity to leave Germany for Australia, where they will be able to freely express their religion and settle there. So they embark on this very long and hard journey on a ship to the other side of the world. And I think that's probably all I should tell you plot-wise. I really love this book. I thought the writing was really beautiful. Hannah Kent has a very lyrical prose style. It's very descriptive, and just the whole scenery comes alive so vividly. It's a quiet, slow-paced kind of story, which I love. But it has a lot of big feelings and a lot of heart in it. It's a story about first love and the tenderness of a first love, but also that all-encompassing visceral feeling of it. I really liked how it explored religion and a bit of mysticism as well. Obviously the book is called Devotion, and that comes back in so many ways in this book. There is a twist in the middle that I know won't be for everyone, but I can't tell you beforehand because that would spoil it. So you just have to go and find out. And if you happen to be one of those people who doesn't like it, then I'm sorry. But I just think that Hannah Kent is a phenomenal writer, and this book definitely deserves a lot more readers. And then the last book I want to talk about today is The Tie That Binds Us by Haruf. This is a book that maybe would have made it into my favorite books, but I only read it like a few weeks ago. I feel like it needs a bit more time to settle, and I want to see how it will stay with me. Again, that's another reason why I decided to do this video. So this book starts in 1977, and we meet 18-year-old Edith Goodnow. She is lying in a hospital bed, but there's a police officer on the other side of the door because she is charged with murder. This is not, however, a murder mystery novel, but just an account of this woman's life. She's not had an easy life. Her parents owned a farm in Colorado, and she's expected to help out from an early age. Her mother dies at a young age, and her father loses his hands in a farming accident, and then becomes almost completely dependent on Edith. And he's just a very bitter, angry man. So Edith becomes sort of trapped in the family, and her sense of obligation and duty to her family, and it just means she gives up her own and it just means that she gives up her own happiness for a long time. And the way Haruf captures Edith's character, her resilience, her devotion is just so beautiful. It's a book about everyday life, about regular people dealing with the hand they are dealt, and just the underlying love that the author shows to his characters, to the lives that they live, to the landscape that they are in. That love just shimmers throughout the entire book. It's a quiet, elegant, subtle story that I think will stay with me for a long time, but we'll see. So those were my runners-up, my almost favorites, honorable mentions, however you want to call it. It's just an excuse to talk about some great books, really. But do we really need an excuse for that? Thank you so much for watching. If you have any thoughts on any of these books, please leave them down below, or just say hi, don't be shy. I promise I will talk about my favorite books next week. That's it for today. I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.